So I'm very pleased to give a little talk about African religion or religions in Africa. I would talk about three dimensions involved in discussing African religions. First question is, where is Africa, the geographical delineation? Secondly, when is Africa, the historical dimension? Three, what is it about when we are speaking about African religion? The content delineation. First, a remark. It's not always easy to capture in Western concepts the reality of African religions. Uniqueness of African languages and beliefs cannot always be unambiguously reflected in Western Christian concepts. We will see it. So first question, first dimension, where is Africa? How is Africa defined geographically? Simplest, wherever people of Africa descend, live, work, and is living, some will say that Africa is rather a mythical, a symbolic, a utopian reality. Something similar applies to Europe as, by the way, for Africans. Africa, of course, is first and foremost the continent itself, which is many times larger than Europe or America. Diversity is many-sided, both in terms of nature and people and cultures. Africa is also present in the African diaspora. First of all in Europe and the USA, in the Caribbean, think about the Voodoo and Rastafari. But secondly, in Brazil, for example, with the Candomblé, Umbanda, Santeria, and Winti, especially in Suriname. This was the first question, where is Africa? Second question, when is Africa? How do we delineate the historical terrain? When we speak of traditional African religions, we are speaking of periods before the colonizations, when there was little outside influence, especially in these areas that were in the interior, and more specifically Central Africa, which is difficult to penetrate by the forests and the rivers. North Africa experienced much buzzier exchange as trade caravans crossed the Sahel in all directions to the major centers of West Africa and East Africa. But the edges of Africa had influences from, first of all, the Islam. We're speaking about African or black Islam that is developed mostly and is more moderate than the strict directions as the Sunni and the Shiite versions of Islam. Secondly, there's the influence of Christianity. We know the influence already from the first centuries of our era, but also with the special forms as the Coptic churches in Egypt and Ethiopia. The latter area offered much resistance to Islamic conversion pressure. But don't forget, there were Jewish communities, and at the eastern side of Africa, the Hindu communities from India. A second layer in the history of Africa is, of course, the transatlantic slave trade that has had an impact that cannot be underestimated. There was already long ago a slave trade towards the east, Arabia and India. But best known is, of course, the transatlantic slave trade to the west, especially South, Central, and North America. The slaves dragged off the West African coast were sometimes quickly converted before sailing. But they retained their ancestral religion. As a result, the Christian religion remained more of a varnish under which the traditional religious world of their ancestors shone through. For example, the Christian saints obscured the orejas, the divine figures in the Afro-Latin American religions. A third layer emerged with the primarily Western Christian-inspired colonization started in the 19th century. Colonization was accompanied by a Christianization in the face of the Arab slave trade and thus against the Islamic influence. But after the Communist Revolution, it was also a matter of keeping godless communism out of the so-called deeply religious African continent. Surely we should not also mention the sometimes fierce conflicts between Catholic Church and Protestant communities. Third dimension, third question, what is it all about when we are talking about African religion? We will distinguish between the original religion, the developed and organized religion, and church as an organization and community. And we will also identify historical developments from religion to church. When we talk about original religion or spirituality eventually, etymologically, religion means connectedness or relatedness. The perception of connectedness, relatedness is a central element. It can be expressed through rituals and through storytelling. And the relatedness starts from the human being, the community, the nature, and the beings in that nature, and also the non-physical, transcendent beings and forces that are nevertheless also real to these religious people. In Western terms, spirits, gods. Forces can be strengthened or weakened. Specialists in these matters, sorcerers, can be consulted to ward off faith and seek reinforcement from good forces. After the original religion, spirituality, we have the developed or organized religion. Religion works organizing, standardizing, both in terms of stories and rituals. Religion develops standard stories about God's creation, relations between gods and humans, role of humans in that creation, and so on. They are passed on from generation to generation by specialized storytellers such as griots, marabouts, babalawo, and so on. And they get different versions depending the clan or the ethnic. But those religions develops also a morality. Pointers on how one best behaves as a man, as a woman, as a young person, as an elder person, toward each other, toward strangers, and so on. And how one relates to one's destiny at birth, transition to adulthood, marriage, and death. All these elements are also asking for the discussion on sorcery or actions and rituals on these several occasions. Third element in the evolution is when a religion is becoming a church, an organized community. Church indicates a progressive institutionalization of religion and faith. Fixed places and times are designated that are sacred. Here and then, one's own strength or search for some salvation can be strengthened, or at least one hopes so. Hierarchy, it means hieros in Greek is sacred, and archos is order, so a secret order, hierarchy is established, both in terms of the texts in a canon, as authorized persons to interpret the texts, and rituals, also called sacraments. Sacra means also sacred, or in a liturgy. The church is the center and sometimes as a conversion zeal. Externally to expand the community, internally to keep out heretics or cause schism. They err, they deviate from true doctrine or true course of action. An example of this development we see in the church of Simon Kibango in Congo at the time of the Belgian colonization, later recognized as a church by the Mobutu regime alongside Catholic and Protestant churches. What topics are covered? First of all, a question of the divinities. We speak rather about divinities because there is not everywhere in Africa one God, a supreme being. In the Ifa religion, for example, the divinities play a larger role to organize the world order. In this world, spirits also play a role. Mostly the spirits are these deceased peoples, founders of the clan or the ethnic. In the world, this world is an intermediary between an upper world, meta world, and a lower world. The unity of the totality of world was created during a dramatic moment in which upper and lower worlds, heaven and earth, water and land, and so on, were separated. In special places and in special times, man can experience the upper world reality. Mountains, rocks, caverns, rivers, trees are inhabited by spirits. Special times are the change of seasons from dry season to wet season, the change of the moon, dark and night, and so on. Night is the time when the world is not only literally but also figuratively in darkness. It threats to humans' loom. Some people in this world turn into animals that devour other people without being aware of it during the day. Full moon is therefore the appropriate time to celebrate life. There is light, there is fire, there are dances. And so the figurative darkness is dispelled. Third element is the question of man. Present humans are between ancestors and offsprings. Children can be the rebirth of a parent who has died. People also do not die completely or continue to live as spirits. Hence, funeral rites are important to guide the deceased into the world of the deceased so that they do not have to return as spirits. Some persons embody this meta-world, both the ancestors and the chief, but also the birth of twins, or people with albino pigment, or someone with a special spot evoke fear. This also explains the fear of witch children wandering around in big cities because they were cursed by their families and ostracized by society. In contemporary gender discussions, it is not immediately clear whether this, as in the West, is based on some kind of natural law or on a reference to authentic African traditions that define what the relationships between men and women may or should be. Between all those elements, there are all forces. Life forces, as Father Tempers would say. Life forces influence different beings and realities. They bring connections, but they can also exert a negative influence. They are present in seemingly inanimate things, for example, rocks and statues, masks, and so on, at the minimal level. They are also present in certain animals that have special meaning for an ethne or clan. Totem animals, tigers, lions, crocodiles. A particularly distrusted animal is the owl, which comes to life only at night. It's the period of the negative forces. In humans, forces can increase or decrease, but they can also continue after death. Completely dead is a human being when his life force is completely reduced to zero. Sacrifices by next of kin can possibly prevent this. Wizards and healers are connoisseurs of these forces. They know them and how they exert influence. And by means of rituals and special objects, fetishes, oracles, symbols, and language, threatening forces are warded off and positive forces are strengthened. But in everyday life, all these realities are connected and influence each other. Balogi's film, Augure, of 23, addresses this in a contemporary setting in Congo, but it's also a theme of African literature and films. Provisional conclusion. This brief analysis of the African religious phenomenon is meant to inspire caution when speaking with African migrants about their religion or worldview. Each African has his or her own story. Every African has their own interpretation of the above, but not every African can thereby explain exactly how it all fits together. Traditionally, the whole story is known by the community. Everyone has a piece of the puzzle that is put together at night when there reminiscence about the day's event. But history is taking its toll. Traditional communities are disappearing. On the one hand, by the growth of megacities in African countries, on the other hand, by migration to the promised land, Europe. The hold of community is disappearing, and shrewd crooks are capitalizing on this. The phenomenon is popping up in African cities. Revival churches are flourishing where an amalgam is made of traditional stories and customs on the one hand to guarantee African so-called authenticity, and on the other hand with influences from today's dominant religions, Islam and Christianity. They offer meaning to those seeking some spiritual guidance, but also security in the new unknown places. And in this respect, it should not be surprising that there are sometimes curious similarities with Western man who has grown away from his traditional religion but feels displaced in an increasingly technologized world that is also changing even faster, and which leads to the distrust of scientific and technical medical developments. It should come as no surprise, then, that the literature and activities surrounding the South African concept of Ubuntu, which points to a relatedness of people with each other and with the environment, is having so much success in the West as well. It seems to have surpassed the Eastern spirituality or thinking of the 70s and 80s. So, I come to my end. For those who want to know more and seek source material, I refer to my syllabus about traditional African religions.